Hello, my name is Nick Deborah. I'm an independent educator and consultant in the fields of data visualization and dashboard design. And this video is a pre-workshop video for my Practical Charts course. And so it's intended to be watched by people who are registered for an upcoming Practical Charts workshop. And in it, I'm going to cover key concepts that will be referred to throughout the workshop. I decided to record this opening part of the course because it tends to be a little bit less interactive than later on when we're doing group activities and group exercises. And so by watching it now, we will then have more time for those activities in the workshop itself. If you're not registered for an upcoming Practical Charts course, then you can visit my website, practicalreporting.com, for information about upcoming private and public workshops. But feel free to watch this video in any case. So what exactly am I going to be talking about? Well, there's going to be just a very brief introduction to myself and the course, Practical Charts. And I'm going to then sort of start with some fundamentals in terms of what exactly I'm going to consider to be a good chart, because of course, the course is intended to teach us how to make good charts. And I'll also talk about why so many charts are not good and what exactly that means and the reasons why audiences are often left confused, bored, unconvinced, or misled by our charts. And then ultimately, of course, we'll leave off with what it takes to create good charts, which is, of course, what we're going to be learning in the course. And so we'll see a sort of a short agenda or brief overview of the agenda as well at the end. So very briefly, a bit about my background. I've taught data visualization and dashboard design as well to thousands of professionals just like yourselves in over a dozen countries. And I have a software background, but this is not a course about software. I'll briefly mention products like Excel and Tableau and Qlik and Jump, for example. But really, the skills that you learn during this course kind of sit on top of whatever software product you're using. I'm the author of 2 books, which will be coming out in 2023 and 2024. One of the books is actually going to be based on this course. From 2013 to about 2019, I taught the courses of Stephen Few. Some of you may know who Steve is. He's very well known in the field of data visualization. This is not a Stephen Few course, but it certainly would not be possible without all the things that I learned from Steve about data visualization and about teaching. So what exactly is this course about? Well, in a nutshell, we're just going to learn how to make good charts. But this does kind of beg the question of exactly what is a good chart. And to answer that question, we kind of have to ask another question, which is, well, what kind of chart are we talking about? Because as you probably know, there are many different things that we call charts. Everything from data art to infographics or ads to charts for analysis or perhaps more scientific customized charts, to what I call everyday charts. These are your charts for kind of everyday reports and presentations, your bar charts and line charts and pie charts and things like that. The Practical Charts course really focuses on these everyday charts. And so that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, which then begs the further question of what exactly is a good everyday chart then? And this may seem like a simple question, but actually, depending on who you ask, you'll actually get different answers, right? For example, a lot of data visualization research studies really measure how precisely people can visually estimate and compare values in a chart, suggesting that good charts are charts that allow people to do that. Other data visualization studies will measure how quickly people interpret charts, implying that charts that can be interpreted very quickly are good charts. Others will say, no, actually, a good chart is one on which people linger, i.e. it's slow to visually process. So kind of the opposite. Yet others will say, particularly judges of data visualization competitions, for example, will say, oh, no, a good chart is something that is creative or beautiful, that presents the data in a novel or original way. Others will say, again, kind of the opposite, that good charts are actually simple and familiar and don't require people to, for example, learn new chart types in order to read them. Yet others will say, no, good charts are versatile. They allow a broad variety of insights to be seen in the chart or allow a wide variety of questions about the data to be answered based on the chart. There are other data visualization studies, for example, that will measure how much information people retain from a chart after it's concealed from their vision, implying that charts that are very memorable are good charts. Others will argue that a good chart is obvious. It doesn't leave the audience guessing about what the point of the chart is or what they should be getting from it. That includes things like comments and annotations to basically explicitly state key insights in the chart, or perhaps key takeaways or recommendations. Others will say, in fact, no, it's kind of the opposite. A good chart, in fact, avoids including any interpretation by the chart creator. And that chart should be neutral and just show the data without any comments or annotations, for example. Yet others will say that, no, a good chart is one that basically provokes an emotional response, like outrage or curiosity or sympathy, for example. And so obviously, if we're going to be figuring out how to make good everyday charts, we better kind of get on the same page about what that actually means. And so I actually have kind of a different definition that I use when I talk about what is a good chart or a good everyday chart, which is that a good everyday chart does the job that it was created to do as quickly, comfortably, and safely as possible. So again, this is kind of a different kind of definition. So let's kind of break this down a bit, right? So what do I mean when I say the job of an everyday chart, like a chart that does its job well? Well, that kind of depends on the chart, because charts can have a variety of different types of jobs, right? They can do things like make the audience aware of something, or persuade the audience to do something, to get vaccinated, to greenlight a project, for example. Or just to explain something to the audience without trying to persuade them to actually do anything or take a course of action. Or maybe the chart is intended to answer a question that the audience has asked, or perhaps allow the audience to filter a look of values, and on and on and on. In fact, what this means is that every chart basically has a different job. The job of a chart changes from one chart to the next. And so some of the things that we saw on the previous slide, like precision and speed of interpretation and memorability, those are what I call kind of the subordinate qualities of a chart. They tend to improve the odds that a chart will do its job, but they're not what ultimately matters, right? What ultimately matters is how well the chart does the job that we created it to do. For example, if we created a chart to persuade the audience to take a particular course of action, well, what matters is, did they take that particular course of action? Not necessarily how precise the chart was or how quickly the audience could interpret it. Those, like I said, are subordinate qualities that help, but they're not what ultimately matters, at least in my view anyways. And so this does basically imply that we need to think differently about how we go about creating charts, right? If we consider that charts are graphics for doing a job, because this is quite different than how most people think of charts. Most people think of charts as visual representations of data. But if we sort of contrast these two ways of thinking, we can see that they're actually quite different. For example, when we sit down to create a new chart, well, if we think of charts as graphics for doing a job, then we're going to ask ourselves, do I know why I'm creating this chart? What is the job of this chart? Am I trying to persuade the audience to do something? Am I trying to explain something to them? Am I trying to answer a question that they have? And that's a different question than what we would ask if we think of charts as visual representations of data, where typically the opening question is, what is the best way to visualize this data? And so we're basically thinking about the data rather than thinking about the job of the chart. If we think of charts as graphics for doing a job, then when we're making design decisions like choosing a chart type or a color palette, for example, or deciding how wide or narrow to make the scales, the job of the chart is going to be sort of at the center of all of those design decisions. Whereas if we think of charts as visual representations of data, then we're going to be making those decisions, or at least trying to make those decisions, based on the nature of the data, like whether it's time series data or the breakdown of a total, for example. And while, of course, we do need to consider the nature of the data in all of our design choices, the job of the chart, I feel, really should be at the center of those design choices, not necessarily the nature of the data. And if we think of charts as graphics for doing a job, well, when we're evaluating charts, we're going to, like as I mentioned before, we're going to evaluate them based on, did the chart actually do the job that we created it to do in the first place? Whereas if we think of charts as visual representations of data, Well, then we're going to evaluate them like based on if they visually represent the data. It's not a very useful way to think about it, right? Because all charts visually represent data, even really bad charts. And so it takes a while to kind of move from this sort of right-hand column towards the left-hand column. But of course, this is what I'm going to sort of try to bring you towards throughout the course. It requires, kind of a real mental shift for most people anyways. So I want to come back to what I mean by this definition of a good everyday chart, because there's a sort of second part, right, where I talk about charts that do their job quickly, comfortably, and safely. And so I want to sort of break that down a bit. Exactly what does that mean? Well, a chart that does its job quickly is, of course, one that simply, takes as little time as possible to interpret for the reader, right? Now, sometimes, of course, our chart might be a little bit more complex, right? The quickest we can make it is still going to require them to spend maybe 30 or 60 seconds to actually understand it. But we're always aiming to, have it be interpreted in as little time as possible. Comfortably simply means that the chart requires as little effort as possible for the audience to interpret. They're not going to be trying to sort of guess, what the data actually means or what the numbers are, or we're going to try and avoid, for example, forcing them to learn new chart types or techniques that they perhaps aren't familiar with. And then safely simply means that we're going to try and create charts that avoid misrepresenting the data. And I'll give you a few examples in a moment, but as we'll see, this is actually surprisingly easy to do. Unfortunately, out there in the real world, many charts simply don't meet any of these criteria, right? They can't be interpreted quickly, right? They are slow to read or unnecessarily slow to read. They're not comfortable, right? Because they're confusing or ambiguous. They require the audience to make perhaps some guesses or assumptions about what the data is or how to read the chart. Basically require a lot of cognitive effort. And they aren't safe in the sense that they pose a high risk that the audience is going to misinterpret the underlying data. And ultimately, many charts simply fail to do their job, right? If we are trying to explain something to the audience doesn't understand what we are trying to explain to them. If we are trying to persuade them to do something, they end up not doing what we wanted them to do. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this sort of safely part here, right? Because it is surprisingly easy to accidentally misrepresent data. In fact, in the course, we will see many different ways. Each one of these chart thumbnails represents a different and yet common way that people accidentally misrepresent the data, right? Where if they were to show the chart to their audience and then quiz them afterwards about the data, they would get very wrong answers, even though the chart creator wasn't trying to actually deceive anyone. And so it's kind of a nasty situation out there in the real world, right? Because many charts leave audiences confused, bored, unconvinced, or misled. Even charts from major news media outlets, high-tech companies, scientific research organizations, universities, think tanks, professional graphic designers, basically organizations that you think would know how to create good charts. Which begs the obvious question, right? Why? Why do so many charts fail to do their job or that are unnecessarily slow or uncomfortable to read or that accidentally misrepresent the data? There are a variety of reasons, but probably the three most common ones are that the audience doesn't trust the data in the chart for whatever reason. They just don't think the data is accurate or valid, perhaps. Or perhaps the audience simply doesn't need the insights in the chart. It's just not relevant to them. It deals with a topic that isn't of interest to them or a problem that they don't have. A really common reason, though, is that the chart has what I call poor data visualization, spelling, and vocabulary. And so I want to talk mostly about this one because realistically, I can't help you with the first two, right? If you have bad data, well, go and fix your data, right? If you don't know what information your audience needs, obviously you need to try and figure that out. But in terms of this poor data visualization, spelling, and vocabulary, what exactly does that mean? Well, that means things like poor chart type choices, using a line chart when you should have been using a bar chart, for example, or vice versa. Poor color palette choices, scales, quantitative scales that are too wide or too narrow, or perhaps that extend to zero when they shouldn't, or vice versa, that don't extend to zero when they should. Lack of highlighting or comments, ambiguous or insufficient chart labeling, poor legend design, and on and on and on. There are many design problems that we'll see all the time. Unfortunately, right after you take this course, you're going to see problems like these everywhere. And unfortunately, these end up making charts slower and more effortful to read, which makes them more likely to be ignored, right? If the audience has to work too hard to interpret a chart, they're just going to skip it. Also make charts simply more confusing, right? Audiences just don't know what they're supposed to get from the chart, or they don't know how to read it. More boring, right? Charts that are less interesting to audiences, or less obvious, right? Where the audience, there's a higher risk that the audience is going to be left wondering, like, why am I looking at this? Why are you showing this to me? Like, what am I supposed to get from this? And ultimately less convincing or less credible, right? If the chart is poorly designed, then people are going to start asking themselves if they should even trust the data behind the chart in the first place. And ultimately, these spelling and vocabulary issues also dramatically increase the risk that the audience is going to misinterpret the data in the chart. The chart will misrepresent the data, even if you're not trying to actually deceive anyone. So let's look at some examples. What exactly do these, poor data viz spelling and vocabulary problems look like? Well, in this scenario, we are, I guess, a money management company. We have a couple of portfolios, our aggressive and balanced and conservative portfolios here. And we want to basically say that our aggressive portfolio contains more high-risk assets. And so we're using this sort of stacked bar chart to show the breakdown of each portfolio by very high-risk, moderate, low-risk assets. And so I can certainly, this chart works, but it's going to require a bit of effort for the audience to actually kind of get the insight that I'm trying to communicate, which is this insight up here. And so if you'd like, pause the video and try to think of how you might make this insight more obvious through better design. So hopefully you paused the video, maybe thought of some ideas. So one way that we can improve this chart would be to change the color palette to what's called a sequential color palette. And so now, even before the audience has read any of the text in the chart, they're going to right away see that whatever this is, it's got a lot more of something than the others, right? And then when they start to read the legend, for example, they understand that that something is essentially risk, right? And so right away they see that this has essentially more high risk assets. This version of the chart also basically is more comfortable. It requires less effort to read, because if we compare it to our original here, well, in this case, the audience had to memorize 5 essentially randomly assigned colors before they can interpret the chart. But here, the only thing they have to memorize is that essentially darker color equals higher risk. And so it's actually easier to remember. It's a more comfortable chart, as well as being more obvious and quicker to interpret. Another example. So here we're looking at, I guess we're a charitable organization, and we're looking at donations by the various regions in which we operate. Obviously, one of our regions doesn't have a bar here. And so again, pause the video and see if you can figure out perhaps, something that's wrong with this chart, or perhaps a way in which it's ambiguous. So hopefully you had a moment to look at it. Obviously, the sort of the wrinkle here is that we don't have a bar for the Southeast region here. And, normally this is not a problem, except we don't really know why there is no bar in this case. Is it because the Southeast had 0 donations? Or maybe we were missing a value for the Southeast. Maybe we don't know what the value was for the Southeast. Or maybe it's pending or TBD or something like that. And so if we don't actually identify why there's no bar there, then this chart is ambiguous. I don't know what's going on with the Southeast. And so one of the things we'll learn in the course is that with bar charts, if you have a bar of 0 length, you have to explain it. You have to put a note in here saying, oh, the value is missing, or it's 0, or it's unknown, or there's been an error, or we're expecting it next month. Whatever it is, unless you put that note in there, then this chart is actually ambiguous. The audience doesn't know how to interpret it. Another scenario, so here again, we're a charitable organization. We're looking at our donations by region here. Clearly the East has far more donations than any of the other regions, but I actually wanted to compare the Central versus the West region to say that, Central donated twice as much as the West. And clearly this is not communicating that in a very sort of obvious or visually obvious way. So again, pause the video if you like, and try to think of how you might make this insight more obvious in this chart. So hopefully you had a moment to think about it. There are a variety of things we can do here, but probably the solution I think would work best would be what's called an inset chart. And so here, of course, we basically kind of blow up these small values into their own little chart to make them easier to see. And now it's much more obvious that in fact the Central region is twice the value of the West region. But I can still see the outlier. I can still see that the East is much greater than the others. And so I'm not hiding the outlier. So it kind of gives me the best of both worlds. And then one more example. So here we're looking at our daily expenses, except that, if you look at the line, you can tell here that we don't have values for all the days. Something must have happened. Maybe we had some sort of data loss, but it looks like we only have maybe 6 or 7 of the last 31 days. So again, pause the video for a moment and think of, perhaps a way that you might improve this chart, or perhaps something that you think might be a bit of a problem with it. So hopefully you had a moment to think about how you might improve this chart. So really the issue, like I said, in this case, is that we're missing a lot of data, right? For whatever reason, we're missing like 80% of of our daily expenses here. And that's a real problem, of course, because we connected the points that we did have, which makes it look like we know what the pattern of change for our expenses was during the month of May here, but we don't have nearly enough information to actually say that, right? If we had all of our values, right, if we recover the data from the server or whatever, well, it might have looked like this, or it might have looked like this, right? And so the fact is that we really have no idea what the pattern of change was, but when we connected the points with lines, we made it look like we did know what the pattern of change was. And so really the best we can do in a situation like this is to use a dot plot. Essentially, we get rid of the line and we just show the values that we have. And so this makes it very clear, this is what we know, right? And this is what we don't. Anything that happened in here is essentially a blank. And so obviously audiences, they don't like it to see a chart like this because nobody likes to see missing data, but the solution can't be to just make up data, right? And so I've given you just a few examples here of, charts with poor spelling and vocabulary and how we can improve them. There are many, many other situations that come up all the time where we can, if we have the right skills, we can avoid making charts that are not obvious or that accidentally misrepresent the data or that impose excessive cognitive effort on our audience. But really, how hard can this be, right? To learn these chart spelling and vocabulary skills? Well, the dirty little secret of this course is that it's actually pretty easy. It's relatively easy to learn these skills, but they're not very intuitive, right? Probably most of you watching the video didn't perhaps see some of the solutions to some of the situations that we were just looking at a moment ago. But of course, when you see it, you're like, oh yeah, of course, it totally makes sense, right? But until essentially somebody shows it to you, it's hard to kind of, come up with these solutions on your own. And it takes time, right? There are a wide variety of situations that we encounter when we're creating charts sort of, in practice, in the real world. And to learn enough to be able to deal with all those situations, it does take some time. And that's why this course, the Practical Charts course, is it's 4 half days if taught online or 2 full days if in person. It's a 14-hour course, right? The idea being to cover enough data viz spelling and vocabulary to handle 90% of the challenges that I see in practice. And so the course curriculum is based on my many years of seeing the kinds of situations that arise in all sorts of different organizations with which I've worked. And also so that you're equipped to avoid 90% of the design mistakes that I see people make when they're making charts in practice, and ultimately to allow you to create charts that do their job as quickly, comfortably, and safely as possible. There are lots of data visualization courses out there. This one I think is probably a bit different though, right? For a few reasons. The first is that I offer very specific guidelines in the course. Other courses, other data visualization books that I've read often sort of fall back onto sort of user judgment, or it depends on the situation when making, for example, design choices around choosing a chart type or choosing colors. And really that's not that useful, especially if you don't have a lot of chart making experience. And so I've really tried to provide very specific guidelines. For example, this decision tree provides very specific guidance on when you, for example, use a pie chart to show the breakdown of a total as opposed to a bar chart or a stack bar chart or a tree map, for example. Or this cheat sheet, which we'll encounter in the course as well, with very specific guidelines on how to format and design effective tables. And there are many of these decision trees and cheat sheets throughout the course. I think this course is also perhaps a bit more streamlined than other courses in the sense that it's just what you need to know and nothing that you don't in order to create good everyday charts. There's no theory. I don't talk about how the human visual system works or data visualization research studies or the history of data visualization. While it's very interesting and there are pointers in the course to resources where you can learn about that if you like, I don't think it's absolutely necessary to learn those things in order to create effective everyday charts. There's also no jargon. I've tried to keep the language level as simple as possible. In fact, I kind of renamed some charts with simpler names that have maybe some jargony names. Nothing that you knew already, at least I hope not, anyways. In working with many organizations and thousands of data visualization professionals, I've learned what people tend to know already and where the gaps in their knowledge are. And so hopefully this is just filling in gaps in knowledge that you already have. And really, like I said, the idea is that this is the minimum amount of information that you'll need in order to create good everyday charts. This is also, I think, probably a more complete course than other courses because we're going to talk about over 60 chart types, including about a dozen, which I actually don't recommend for everyday charts. There's going to be 15 of those cheat sheets like the one that I showed you before, 11 decision trees, over 200 key takeaways. The idea being, like I said, that you're going to come away from the course equipped with enough knowledge to handle the vast majority of data visualization challenges that you're likely to face in your day-to-day work and avoid the most common mistakes that I see people make in practice. So that's what this course kind of covers, but I think it's also worth mentioning what it doesn't cover because there's a lot of sort of confusion about what a term like data visualization actually means and what it covers or doesn't. And so this course, it's not a course about Excel or Power BI or Tableau or any particular software product, right? I'm going to assume that you have a basic, not expert, but a basic working knowledge of at least one of these products already, and then you have access to an internet search engine where you can essentially Google anything that you see in the course that you're perhaps not sure how to create. I don't use any sophisticated or advanced features or chart types of any of these products, and so you do not need to be a software expert for this course. I'm also not going to really talk about sort of data art or infographics where the objective isn't necessarily about sort of clear, efficient communication. And we're not going to talk about sort of specialized or scientific charts for more sophisticated audiences. Really, these are charts that, for the most part, you would find in the mainstream media, for example. And so we're going to stick to generally pretty kind of simple chart types like bar charts and line charts and pie charts, for example. We're also not going to talk about information dashboards. Information dashboards entail a whole slew of other considerations. And in fact, I have a whole other course, which is of a similar duration to this one called Practical Dashboards, which deal with those specific dashboard challenges. And we're also not going to really talk about using charts for analysis, because of course, that's the other major use case of charts, where we're using charts to as a tool for ourselves to find interesting patterns and insights within data. We're really just sticking to charts that are used to communicate to an audience. I have an entire other course as well called Graphs for Analysis, which deals with charts for analysis, where we are the only people who are going to see the chart, where we're using charts to discover useful insights and patterns within data. And so really this course, the Practical Charts course, just covers simple, quote unquote simple, everyday charts for reports and presentations. I put simple in quotes here because, of course, there's a lot to learn in order to make these everyday charts that are that do their job as quickly, comfortably, and safely as possible. And so a quick overview of the agenda. What are the major topics that we're going to cover in the course? Well, there's the introduction, which is basically what we're doing right now. We're talking about what makes a good chart, why do charts fail, how to make good charts, or what is required in order to make good charts. When the live workshop begins, the first topic we're going to talk about are general chart formatting guidelines. And so guidelines that apply to all chart types, whether they're bar charts or line charts or pie charts. And so talking about things like grid lines, tick marks, axes, axis lines. Then we're going to talk about scales, right? The four major types being categorical, quantitative, interval, and time scales. Of course, color, very important when we're designing charts. We have to make good color choices. A little bit about legends, and then some notes about formatting, text, and numbers and dates. We're going to spend a big chunk of time in the middle of the course talking about different chart types, how to choose chart types for showing data over time, the breakdown of a total, for showing distributions, correlations, locations, i.e. showing data on a map or perhaps not, depending on the situation. And then other important chart types like bar charts, tables, heat maps, combo charts, charts that have two different types of charts within the same chart, and then about a dozen chart types that I actually recommend avoiding, not using for everyday charts. And then we'll talk about how to show data that has a more kind of complex underlying structure where there's multiple sort of variables, multiple categories, multiple measures involved, because this happens all the time in practice. So we should talk about how to address that. A little bit about filters and animation, which sound like good ideas, but I'll show you that in most situations, you're actually better off with static charts. I'm going to talk about ways to make charts obvious. Right? You know, the obvious ways being to add explicit comments and annotations and even messages within chart titles, for example, but also what to do when we don't know why we're creating a chart, because that happens sometimes. And so I have a strategy that I recommend called spray and pray for dealing with those situations. And then some final notes on making charts less boring, right? Ways to make our charts more engaging, more interesting, but without making them more confusing or cognitively demanding, which is really easy to do when we're trying to make our charts more interesting. And then some wrap-up notes under a section that I just call What Now, dealing with how to continue to improve after the course, and even some thoughts on some emerging technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, and of course, artificial intelligence, and how these technologies may impact data visualization in the near future. So thanks very much for listening, and I will see you soon for the live workshop, either in person or online. Until then, thank you.